Finally. It was a beautiful day, and I finally convinced my family, maybe not to go kayaking with me, but I convinced them to go canoeing, and it was a wonderful day. It was beautiful. The weather was perfect, and we canoed together. And in the back of my head, I knew that God was present, and God spoke to me, even in the midst of this beautiful day, and even in the midst of this canoe trip, and gave me a full reminder of who God is, and how present God is, how wonderful creation is, but also how God cares for us. It was a wonderful day, and we went canoeing. And as far as canoeing went, there were two canoes of two of us. So there were two canoes, and there were two each in each one. And I rowed with Ryan. Ryan was in my canoe, and Kate and Ethan were in their canoe. And we launched, and it didn't take very long to realize how, on such a beautiful day as this was, when you're going with the current, it's fabulous. All you really have to do is maybe drag your oar, your paddle a little bit, and sort of steer and stay away from the banks. You can paddle a little, but the current takes you, and it's fantastic when you're with the flow of the stream or the water. But Ethan and Kate were having a little bit of trouble. They kept getting hung up, and so I would have to keep looking at Ryan, and I have to say, well, I don't want to get too far ahead, and I want to go back and help them. You know, I'm who drug everybody out on this canoe trip, so I want to make sure everybody's having a good time, so let's go back. And so we would turn in the paddling against the current. Boy, is that a difficult thing. God has created our world. God has set it in motion, God sustains it, and God is present in it. And it's filled with water. Water that flows in its pattern, and the pattern that God has set it into. Ever noticed how water follows a pattern and follows it down your windshield, or in your house, or in the stream? This is the pattern or the order that God has set to creation. And what I've discovered is that we spend a lot of our lives thinking that it's all about us and our power and our ability. And we paddle against the current so much. We know that all of creation seems to be moving in this certain way, but we just think that we need something to be accomplished that day, or we have something that's our own goal, and we end up spending what I would say is a lot of our time paddling against the current. That's what's come to mind this week as you join me for the midweek psalm and prayer, where in joining me, I typically read a psalm, but this week I am foregoing the psalm, which is Psalm 70. I'm not going to read that, and in lieu of it, I'm going to read from Amos, the book of Amos. This week's Hebrew Bible or Old Testament reading is from the book of Amos, and it comes from chapter 5. And in particular, I think I'm struck by this because of this bit about water. I'm struck by it because of the message, which is a fairly dark and scary one, but that ends up so promising, and that wraps up in Amos chapter 5, verse 24, with one of these extremely well-known verses of the Bible, maybe one of the most important verses in all of the prophets, and a reminder for you and I today. So I'm going to read from Amos. I'll talk about it a little bit more, and then we'll pray together. This is a reading from the 5th chapter of Amos, and I'm going to begin with the 18th verse. Alas, for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light. As if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Where has all of our paddling against the current gotten us? Where have all of our own work and our own deeds gotten us? Amos reminds us a little bit about that. And it reminds us, and it speaks about how the day of the Lord is actually darkness and not light. And maybe it speaks about that because we need to hear that. Because so often we're paddling against the stream, and things are coming to us, even though it's work, coming to us, and we're getting what we want, and we have our stuff, and we have our health, and we have everything. But then this day of darkness, or months of darkness, we're not sure how we feel about how things are going on in the world. We're not sure if we get along with how our neighbors talk about other people or what's happening. We're all put into one kind of person or another kind of person, and it's just sort of this time of darkness and illness. And Amos has to remind us that that's the very day of the Lord. And we've paddled against the stream. We've made it about us. We've been good people who get to church, or who have taken good care of other people, or talk a lot about how well we've gotten things done, and we're in general good people. But when it gets to this point, and this is why this day becomes so holy, the illusions are shattered. And all we have left is the order that God has given creation, the order that we were supposed to be moving in to begin with. This is a time for you and I to no longer make it about us and what we're capable of. It's a time to admit that our own control and our own desires and our own work to paddle upstream has led to darkness, or has ended in this dark spot. And it's in a dark spot that the day of the Lord shines. There's nothing to go from here from but resurrection. There's nowhere to go from here but up. And it's a time to be set back in tune with the way God intended us to live and to be, and our canoe switches around, and now we're moving with the very direction of the water, the way God created it. And yes, in the midst of the stream, there is still some maneuvering or some things that need to be done to sort of situate ourselves and not really run into the bank, but it's much easier work. It's the direction of God's living water, the direction of our baptismal waters. And the direction is not about us, it's about God, a God who certainly loves us and cares for us even when it's dark. And it's about God's justice, the knowledge that you and I are able to care for others and be cared for by others. That in a world where people live without the things that they need, or where things seem at odds because of a person's skin color, or because of a person's gender, or because of a person's sexuality, we are able to go with the flow because we trust the God who has set and given us those waters. And yeah, we can maneuver in them a little bit, but the waters move the directions the waters move. And they move in the direction of justice, of care and proper regard for each other and for the rest of God's creation. And they move us into the way of righteousness that covers us even in the midst of the darkness. And so I can remember today that canoe trip, and I can remember with a smile on my face that I finally got my family to participate in this with me. And my hope is that we can participate in our own kind of canoe trip. The waters of God's creation moves in the direction of justice and righteousness, and you and I need not paddle against it, bash our heads against it, scream against it, yell and lecture and scream into the torrent and into the current. God has already set God's creation in the direction that it'll go, and you and I are part of that current. And in the midst of that current, we hear God's love. We participate. We have done for us and we do for others the idea of justice. And we are awash in the righteousness of God. Today is yet another day, even though it's not a psalm, to remember that we set aside our own paddling against the current day after day after day. And we breathe together in our canoe, the ship that is our church and our body of the people of St. Stephen. And we know that together God will care and guide us if we think of love and justice and righteousness and allow ourselves to breathe the spirit of the day and be formed as God's people. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for bringing us through another night and into another day. Though we are drowned in the waters that we so often fight against and struggle against and move against, we know that today can be a great letting go. That your power and your might holds goodness for this day. And that instead of fighting against the current and being pulled under and being drowned in it, we remember that we are baptized people and we've already been drowned. And in that drowning, what it's really about is our being pulled back out of those waters again and moving now with you in the direction that they would go. And we ask that you would help us be a people who, as hard as it can be at times, would identify love even for that person who votes differently or thinks differently. And maybe not bash our head against others and the way people work and the way people drive and the way people do things, but simply believe that if we move in the direction of love and justice and righteousness, the way that your waters flow, that we will have this leisurely, beautiful day in your presence and in your care. We ask that you would help us make this day not about us and ourselves, but you would help us to know what you are about and what you have made creation about. And we ask that you would make us about this too, that we would drown to going against the current, and that you would pull us out again and bring us with it into the day and the week of salvation and confidence in you. We ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Thanks for joining me for the midweek midweek Old Testament reading, this week from the 5th chapter of Amos. I hope that you have a moment today to know that it's not about paddling against things, but finding beauty and finding God where you can and working with the justice and the righteousness that is around you. I hope that you stay safe. I hope that you care for one another. And above all, I hope to see you soon. Take it easy.